Good evening, and welcome to another screening of the graphic novel Picture Show. I'm your host, Sybil Pandemic. In my last video, you may recall that I put forth 1602 Daredevil as a possible candidate to replace the current Daredevil in the aftermath of this whole Convergence deal. But it occurs to me, and most of you probably don't even know who that is. So I think it's time for a little refresher in comic book history. Marvel 1602 was an 8-issue series written by Neil Gaiman, because of course it was, that set the Marvel Universe in 17th century Britain. Much in the same way that Gotham by Gaslight is a Batman story that takes place in 19th century New England. Marvel Studios only ever made one 1602 movie, and ironically, it features a character that didn't actually appear in the books. But, as DC always says, why let the source material get in the way of a meh story? Today we're looking at Wolverine 1602, or as it's known by its theatrical title, Les Miserables. Immediately we hit our first problem with the adaptation. It starts in 1815. The whole conceit of Marvel 1602 is that it is set in the year of our Lord 1602. And you couldn't even get that right? Also, this movie is set in France? Off to a bad start. We open up on Wolverine in French slave jail, which is clearly a stand-in for the Weapon X program, since, you know, the idea of creating super soldiers isn't really a thing in 19th century France. But it has the same effect of making Logan—
My name is Jean Valjean.
Sorry, Jean. It makes him a pariah, a social outcast, because even when Javert, an analog for Professor Andre Thornton, the head of the Weapon X program, frees him after almost 20 years, his papers will still bear the mark of a criminal for the rest of his life. He stumbles upon a church where he's taken in and given shelter by a priest. When he tries to make off with their silver, he's caught by the police and dragged back to return it. But the priest lies to them, saying that the silver wasn't stolen, rather that it was given freely as a gift. This gives Wolverine a new lease on life and inspires him to become a better person, showing us that this priest was meant to be who else but Professor Charles Xavier. The film then cuts to 8 years later, where Wolverine has gone completely off the grid. In those 8 years, Jean has really made something of himself. He now owns a sweatshop, and he has in his employ Catwoman, which is especially odd since she's a DC character. But here, she's desperately trying to make enough money to support her young daughter, Cosette. When the foreman discovers that she has a daughter, he immediately throws her out on the street, because apparently he's the villain in a Dickens novel. He doesn't need a reason, he's just evil for the pure joy that comes with being a dick. Desperate to make money in any way she can, Catwoman sells her hair, her teeth, and then everything else. Jean then finds her, and she dies. Not uncommon for an Elseworlds tale, which is actually one of the things I kinda like about them. They're a lot looser with who can live and who can die, because since, you know, the story doesn't have to run for 20 years, you don't have to reset back to default at the end of every story like it's a fucking sitcom. Now, in the 8 years since Jean has stopped reporting in with probatory officers as per the terms of his parole, Javert has never stopped hunting him. But apparently he doesn't actually remember what he looks like, and another man is mistaken for Wolverine and set to receive his punishment until he runs in, reveals his true identity, and flees to collect Catwoman's daughter. As a means of giving her a better home, Catwoman had left Cosette with an innkeeper and his wife. Clearly, this universe's version of Sabretooth and Mystique, respectively. I mean, come on. Just look at those chops. Jean takes Cosette to raise as his own, paying Monsieur and Madame Sabretooth for their trouble. After 9 more years of evading Javert, Wolverine and Cosette are living in Paris on the eve of the June Rebellion. Some of you who aren't as big on world history as I am might not know what that is. So, we're gonna give a little history lesson to provide a bit of context. The French Revolution began in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille, In 1792, France was reformed as a republic, and by 1793, the revolutionaries had overthrown the nobility and executed King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. Every other European monarchy responded to these proceedings with a resounding, no you fucking don't. Because if they can do it, what's to stop their own people from getting similar ideas? Because if a bunch of filthy French peasants, the filthiest of peasants, mind you, can just roll up and behead the king, then the monarchy as an ideal is no longer a force to be feared. The other countries immediately declared war on revolutionary France in what would come to be known as the French Revolutionary Wars, and leading the French army to victory in battle after battle was none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, Napoleon was able to use his massive popularity, and also his army, to take control of France in its entirety, declaring himself emperor in 1804, essentially saying, "In order to ensure our security and continuing stability, the French Republic shall be reorganized into the first French Empire for a safe and secure society, which I assure you will last 10,000 years. Napoleon was deposed in 1814 after a catastrophic invasion of Russia in the winter, a lesson that no one in history ever seems to learn. A coalition of European nations then exiled him to an island in the Mediterranean Sea and put Louis XVIII on the throne, the latter of which did not please the French. A year later, Napoleon escaped exile to reclaim his title, which did not please anybody. At the Battle of Waterloo, he was defeated once and for all and exiled to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he died a terrible death of stomach cancer. Or arsenic poisoning. It's still being debated. So, after 15 years of rule by the very dynasty they'd spent 10 years revolting to overthrow, the French underclass was not happy, leading to the rise of French Republicans, people who wanted to bring back the Republic. In the movie, they're led by, Edjorlas? Well, you fucking try to pronounce it! Please email all corrections regarding my pronunciations to thefilmrenegado@theagonybooth.com. But Wolverine doesn't really care about the plight of the French Republicans, obviously an allegory for the Mutant Registration Act from the comics. He's more concerned with keeping Cosette safe and evading Javert, who's still hunting him after all these years. He's perfectly content to lie low and let the rebels do as they will, until he finds out that Cosette is in love with one of them, a young man named Marius, clearly meant to be Cyclops, which would make Cosette Jean Grey, but her hair is blonde, which implies that she would be Emma Frost, but they're in love. The other girl who's in love with Marius has dark hair, so I'm kind of confused as to what all this is supposed to mean now. So, just like in the comics set in the modern day, Wolverine is drawn into a conflict in which he has no real stake in order to protect the people he cares about, which is really the only time Wolverine is interesting to me. He sneaks down to the barricade where the rebels are making their final stand so he can protect Marius when the French army comes down on them like a cannon. Which it does. With cannons. Yeah, the June Rebellion didn't really work out all that well. That's why they call it a rebellion. It's only a revolution if it succeeds. So, full disclosure, and this may just have been a naive expectation of mine going in, but why won't Wolverine use his claws? I mean, he's got his healing factor, and they're all armed with nothing but front-loading muskets. What's he afraid of? He could take all of them easy. And then, maybe someone other than Marius will survive. 'Cause you know what? All this death, completely meaningless. The June Rebellion was a colossal failure that had no effect on anything, because the Second French Republic would not be formed for another 16 years. But that lasted only slightly longer than the French First Republic, being overthrown in a coup by Napoleon III, creating the Second French Empire in 1852. The Second Empire would rule France until 1870, when it was replaced by the Third Republic. That lasted until 1940, and I don't think I need to tell you what happened in 1940. Oh, do I? Well, in that case, after Adolf Hitler rose to power in post-World War I Germany, he engaged in a reign of terror that would overshadow all other reigns of terror throughout history. When Germany invaded France, it set up a puppet government known as the French state, or Vichy France, which would rule the country until the French Fourth Republic was formed after the war, which is still in place today. This has been the history of the French government, from the Revolution to today. I feel like we've forgotten something. Well, it doesn't matter. Next time, we'll list off all the great Italian war heroes of the 20th century. Oh. Actually, I can just do that right now. This has been Civil Pandemic, turning history into herstory.
It's called hysteria, the world premiere ya. We dare ya to watch hysteria. Prepare ya for hilaria. They love it in Bulgaria, hysteria. We declare ya, be aware ya. The laughter's gonna marry ya, we swear ya. It's extraordinary, it's set for